Thank you very much. Very nice to be here. And Eric, really appreciate that introduction. I think just quickly for those that may not have known that detail before Eric's introduction, Humanforce is one of those specialist workforce management solutions. I'm actually really pleased to say I met Maggie earlier today. We had a brief conversation. She'd already met some of our team and been introduced to Humanforce. So there are people in the audience that know us from before today. Very simply, we try and get the right people in the right place at the right time with the right skill set. And cricket grounds, there are many that sit within our client portfolio, Eric. So a nice stomping ground for us.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Nathan. So the session of today, as Eric said, is practical strategies for effective workforce management. But that's a really big subject area, and so we're not going to do that justice in the 20-25 minutes that we have here today with you. So what we thought we'd do is just deep dive into one particular area of that whole subject matter, which is rostering. And actually, rostering is something that might surprise you to know we're actually quite passionate about jointly. Not everyone might be, but we definitely are, and there are some good reasons for that. So why are we passionate about rostering, Nathan?
Tough after-lunch subject when many of you have eaten and you might be wanting to have a small afternoon nap. I also appreciate we've come after Nick and his colour and energetic, very yellow presentation. So we'll try and do some justice, hence the fireside chat, hence we're not going through a whole host of slides. But simply put, the reason I get passionate about rostering is probably down to the large-scale number of blue and green individuals in this room. Because if we get it right at the front end with the data, and capturing that time and attendance relevant data right at the beginning, then that output to payroll should be fairly simplistic. I do get nervous. I spoke to Matt. Is Matt still in the room from CIPP? Maybe he's not. Maybe he ran away knowing I'd mention him. I always get very nervous because one of our jobs with time and attendance is to take all of those legislative challenges and rules and requirements that people like Matt talk to you about and make sure that we start to build that into the system so that when that data is captured, we get that neat and tidy output for you to process within payroll or within your wider HR solution. Yeah. But that's why I get excited about rostering, because we start with a definition with a backbone to that bit of business information that you need to process.
So on the subject of rostering then, it's obviously hugely, hugely important for organisations that have large numbers of what we would call frontline workers or deskless workers. So a deskless worker being?
So we in this room might end up being responsible for how we ultimately define this, because a lot of what we're seeing is an evolution post-pandemic in the way that people work. We've coined the term so far, deskless workers, within the Humanforce business to define people that work in flexible locations, maybe cross-department, maybe cross-role. So let's just take a second there. Humanforce as a time and attendance solution is built on a location, area, department and role structure, which means that we're really highly configurable, as Eric mentioned, to multiple situations where you might be working across a number of care homes, where that person might do one job in the morning and a different job in the afternoon. So that configuration is really important. And the person doing those multiple roles in multiple locations forms, in our definition, a deskless worker. Some people could call them flexible because they're working cross-location, cross-department. But I think the people in this room, especially the HR professionals, might play a part in how that term ultimately gets defined, because it's an evolving workplace.
Yeah, we might take some ideas on that if you've got more as we go through. So just in terms of a show of hands then from the audience, how many people in the audience have worked in organisations that need to pay or manage deskless workers? So a fair few. I mean, I also might have expected to see more. I think we will see more. And the reason for that is that what we know is that deskless workers make up the fastest growing subset of workers globally. 80% of global workforce is deskless already, right now, which is something like 2.7 billion people. So it's a massive, massive number of people. The other thing we know, and this is all from Humanforce research, by the way, and other things I think out there in the industry, is that only about 1% of Silicon Valley spend is going into technology for deskless workers. So it kind of feels like they're a bit of a neglected cohort of workers despite their size. What do you think the problems are with that, Nathan? We've talked about it a bit together.
Yeah, we'll come on to the problems in just a second, but let's just pause on those statistics, because you've got 2.7 billion people globally fall into this deskless or flexible workforce environment. Really big industry sectors are covered in that, the number one being agriculture. You've got construction as the number two sector in that space, and then dropping down around 3 or 4, you've got hospitality, leisure, probably as a combined sector. And Eric made reference to a cricket venue in the UK. In the UK, Humanforce is heavily exposed to hospitality and leisure environments from its inception in this country in 2014, where we came and worked with a very large global football stadium provider and contract caterer. So that's the space in which we work. But I think you asked me what are some of the problems with the way that technology is being used in that space.
Or not used at the moment enough.
And that's what we're seeing. So let's just quickly talk about the journey or the life of one of those workers. Post-pandemic specifically, I probably operate multiple jobs. I may do a bit of Uber work on the side. I might do some Deliveroo. And I might have this, let's say, hospitality job at a cricket ground not too far from here. Now, I need to be communicated with, but I don't have an office from which I work. I don't have a company email. I don't have a laptop. I might have a mobile phone. And I don't know if any of you are as grey-haired as me and can think back to standing next to a static phone, trying to dial the people on your list to fill your roster in your pub bar or in your golf club food environment. Well, it used to give me more grey hairs than I probably should have had at that age. So talking to them is really one of the biggest challenges. I think the HR discussion that we heard earlier today, that employee value proposition, making people feel welcome in your organisation, that communication piece is fundamental. So where there's a lack of that technology, communication is inherently difficult. And then it has other aspects that knock onto that, which is getting them to work quickly and efficiently and upskill them and de-skill them for the roles that they need to do.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And I guess the key thing to say is, as you probably noticed, even if a lot of tech companies are not interested, we definitely are. So we'll delve into a bit more about where rostering then fits in specifically in workforce management. We've talked a bit about why it's a headache, but particularly when it's a paper-based process and a manual process, what are the really painful elements of the implications of that?
Just a quick audience question. Could you put your hand up if you still operate a roster situation that is, let's say, Excel-based? How big's your Excel spreadsheet? No, you'd have to answer. But a lot of the clients that come to us where they have an individual or multiple individuals who proudly own a spreadsheet that takes them many hours on its own just to scroll to the right-hand column. It's that big. And just to let you know, that's not uncommon. We are currently working on a project signed off just last week with the result of the International Olympic Committee for Paris 24. That organisation is going to mobilise with Humanforce to do the rosters for next year, purely because they have just done the FIFA World Cup women's rostering on a gargantuan Excel spreadsheet and have nearly all lost the will to live.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest changeovers and biggest benefits, really, of digitising.
Yeah. And I think you also said that sometimes when things are paper-based, it can sort of also drive a level of potential unfairness, things like that.
Well, there's a couple of bits. So I guess we all like Nick's session on colours, so maybe we should reference colours. If I'm talking to someone who's highly read, maybe someone in Eric's position, the first thing that the issue with paper-based is going to cause Eric is he's got a lack of control. He's potentially got a lack of compliance, so some of the blues might start to fidget in the room because we can't really see what's going on, and we're probably going to get overspent before we even know that we've got overspent because we've not really got that real-time data. The yellow people in the room are probably not really able to socialise and find out which friends are on the same shift as them, so they'll get a bit nervous as well because this Excel spreadsheet happens off in the distance. And the people who are very green probably don't really feel engaged and welcome because we're not communicating with them, and actually I'm really good friends with Tom, so Tom always gets the shift he wants, always, forever. And then everyone else falls in afterwards. So the paper-based system can have that, and inherently comes with some of those data errors that can cause, fundamentally for all the people in this room, a time and a cost issue, which is when, again, Eric gets very excited. If it's time and cost reduction, he probably starts to listen. But those would be two of the key things that we see people coming to us with. Yeah,
okay, brilliant. So let's think about what good looks like. What's an example of where we've kind of gone from zero to hero status with an organisation that's had some of these challenges?
Anyone had a COVID vaccination? Could you put your hands up? If you haven't, that's your choice. But most of you, it was a safe bet.
That's a dodgy question.
No, it's a safe bet. The reason I ask, anyone ever been for a COVID test? Fantastic. 6.5 days before you were able to go to a COVID test centre or go and have a COVID vaccination, the workforce that were wearing high-vis yellow vests and working out of porter cabins worked for one of our clients in a contract catering hospitality business, which had gone to zero. None of them had any work, but they were all on the Humanforce platform. So 7 days after they were told they weren't working, they were all back providing you a national service. And that was achieved because of a best practice scenario where data, time and attendance information, contact, communication, deployment could be done at record time in response to a government request, actually. And that contract catering company pivoted in that 6-day window as a real test case for how time and attendance and good workforce management with communication tools can deliver that for them.
Yeah,
so that's a one that I can think of straight away.
It's a really good example because in some respects, that kind of response could apply to an organisation that wouldn't normally only be focused or predominantly focused on frontline and deskless workers. If we think about the rate of change going on in the world at the moment, unexpected disruptive events, actually being able to better respond, communicate, and manage our workforce, it crosses boundaries, right?
Well, you asked for good news cases, so let's share one other good news case and possibly another more challenging version of that world. So we all lived in this post-pandemic environment, and you may or may not know, but one of the first ever national sporting events to be hosted post-pandemic, well, actually, that's a lie. I don't want to lie to you. Mid-pandemic, we were still mobilising events and demobilising events as the government changed its go to work, don't go to work, stay at home, don't stay at home. These might be familiar things from a previous politician who's no longer one, but...
Purposely confusing,
yeah,
you say?
So right in the middle of that, people in your type of business situation and HR professionals were trying to react. And in our client world of sports, leisure and hospitality, this was felt really prominently at Wembley. And because of them using the Humanforce solution and talking to their teams, they were able to take these 2,500 workers that hadn't had a lot to do, because actually that business was really badly impacted. And the government turned around and said, yeah, we're going to run this thing called the European Champs, and we're just going to throw it on, and it's all going to happen fairly short shrift, and you've got to remobilise this entire workforce in no time whatsoever. And thankfully, they were able to communicate, and they did make it happen, and we all know it was a great success. So again, another good use of that solution. The flip side is I was at the same time talking to friends in an organisation that didn't have a solution other than the giant Excel spreadsheet, and they were trying to contact Colin. Colin was in row 5 A's, 2 Z's, and 1024 C or something, but that's where Colin was. But we couldn't get to Colin, and they actually were told by the government they could put on a horse racing event. And 12 hours before that going live with a whole host of activity, they had to try and demobilise the workforce. And the end result was 450 people still turned up to work, and they still had contractual obligations to pay this agency labour workforce because they couldn't talk to them, couldn't communicate with them, and ultimately couldn't demobilise them quick enough to react to the government changes. So the flip side can be quite painful in time and money.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. So there's some really interesting examples of rapid response, being able to properly communicate, all those good things. One of the things you've told me when we've talked about this before has been that 10 years ago, effective workforce management was really about command and control. It was like a big brother approach of, I need to know what my staff are doing, when they're doing it, and I need to be so in control of my cost base that I can just squeeze down the numbers and make it as efficient as possible. That was what it was all about. But what you've seen over the last few years, I think, and as you've worked with customers to transform, is it's been much more about cultural change and embedding flexibility into the culture and bringing the benefits of that culture.
Yeah, I know I've met some payroll people at lunch. HR professionals in the room? Quick show of hands. How easy is the recruitment marketplace at the moment? Super easy, or?
Hands up for easy.
Any easy? Our clients are saying that to us all the time, especially in the gig economy environment, the flexible worker environment. Let's just talk about some quick numbers. I think it was 6 years ago, 6 to 7 years ago, the first commission report on the gig economy was brought together by the government. And I think at that point they identified about 780,000 workers in that space identified as gig economy workers, people that take partitioned work in multiple environments, so they gig. That number stands at over 7.5 million only 6 years later, and it's only set to grow in that space. So I think post-pandemic, something like 40% of full-time employees admitted to having second lines of work, and the current credit crisis is only going to exacerbate that, where people are taking on additional shifts. In fact, one of our clients is seeing an absolute age range change in their recruitment for flexible workers because retirees are topping up their pension by going back to work. So they're having to think differently about their employee value proposition and how they engage. So recruitment is inherently difficult. People are working differently and they need to be engaged differently. And we very much see our role in that as providing a method to communicate with large pools of people in a very efficient way and get them out to work. And you're competing against other options. So people are far more tech aware to take their work in that mobile flexible format.
Yeah. And so when we think about, okay, so if the labour market is becoming more difficult for us to recruit in as employers, what are the three things that we need to be doing? And I know you've got three which always hit home really hard: fun, money, and learning.
Yeah.
Nathan Miller, Humanforce. What's that all about?
Yeah. So just pop back a second, because I don't think I fully finished your answer on the previous one, just around that kind of 10-year journey. So going back to that point about the recruitment market being really difficult, absolutely 10 years ago, the clients knocked on our door and says, can we have Humanforce because we want to employ our own compliance measures on this workforce. I want to know that, in fact, I should have clocked on before I started talking. I want to know that Nathan's on shift, he's in the right place, he's doing what he's meant to do, and I want to be able to see his timesheet. And I also want to know that Nathan's right to work here is okay, he's got a secure stadium pass, and I want to know that it's him with multi-factor authentication.
And he hasn't claimed more than once for the same shift?
Yeah, so our clients were seeing that in that agency space, people were turning up with to one venue as one person, but they were getting 3 or 4 timesheets signed off by 3 or 4 different agencies, and the cost was massive. And that was a real problem for them. So they were very much control and compliance. That same client, still with us, still a really important client 10 years later, the tonality has completely changed. How do I provide a social engagement platform for my teams? How do I provide micro-learning through your environment? How do I engage in early wage access to these employees? All of these factors are coming at us from that client because these are fundamental cultural differences. So it was all about control and compliance 10 years ago, very much more about culture, engagement, and communication.
Yeah, makes sense. So, thinking then about what we would say in terms of takeaways, like communication and self-service, fun, money, and learning. Anything else you want to say about those things?
The fun, money, learning piece, I do think, my advice is if you're setting out on a journey for any kind of technology change in your business, and ideally you're all here because you're fully engrossed in using Cintra, which is fantastic, but think about that broader ecosystem from the perspective of the worker, the employee, the part-time, flexible, deskless worker. I always distill it down to what motivates me to go to work, and if I'm having fun, it's my triangle. If I'm having fun, I'm learning something, and I'm being paid at a level that is acceptable for what I'm doing, then I will stay. And if I have all three, I'm going to stay for a long time, and my retention will be high, and your replacement cost should be low. If I have 2 out of 3, I'm definitely going to stay for a while. If I start to have 1 or less, I'm going to find that slightly challenged. And where we're coming at it is we're trying to look at how do you do that with this highly transient, flexible workforce? Because if you get it right there, for the more permanent workforce, it should be a lot easier. And that's what they're looking for. The ability to socially interact with their colleagues, the ability to learn. Micro-learning is a critical one for us to start re-engaging with at the moment. And then where's my direct correlation between that and the money?
Yeah.
Can I see it? And I'll just leave you with this. One of our clients is a very well-known, recently triple recognised, successful football club in the north, if you like them, and blue.
I'm looking at a football club, but I know it's not you.
But if you like them and you like blue, you might know who they are. Well, they have a contract catering company that we work with in provision of their services. And they keep telling us one of the number one things for their team engagement is seeing their payroll slip just ahead of payday so they can deal with those issues, mistakes in real time, or the fact there is very little error in that provision. So we feel really responsible in playing a part in that, because if we get it right, we remove that emotive challenge around pay, we directly link effort to pay, and retention rates are seen to go up. And they actually cite mental health benefit from seeing that rather than the stress of pay. So that's a key one I'll leave you to take away from that.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. So while we're here, and given you've seen Nathan is definitely a font of knowledge when it comes to this particular topic, and all the topics related to it, I would say, any questions or observations of challenges you might have had, things you'd like to share? I may well get met with silence, and that's okay. But if anyone's got any questions, feel free. Otherwise,
it's the post-lunch. It was a good lunch.
Post-lunch, it was.
It was post-it.
It was. But yeah, please come and find either of us to talk about it more. We're working together really closely on a number of things that we think are really impactful with a bunch of really interesting, important customers. And obviously, we'd love to talk to more of you about those hurdles and how we can overcome them together. So do come and find us later today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.